This is a chart that every tech investor should know because it tells us when innovative tech companies will see their stock price rise. With CrowdStrike's stock price down over 30% after accidentally causing the biggest IT outage of all time, but the overall stock still up over 75% for the year, let's see how tech investors can predict CrowdStrike's next 75% rise or avoid another impending crash before it happens. So this chart shows us the waves of opportunity that occur during a technology revolution. When the mobile internet revolution started, we first saw the rise in semiconductor stocks like Qualcomm and ARM to support the new technology. This is a lot like the rise we're seeing today in GPU stocks like Nvidia and AMD. The next wave that happens is the infrastructure wave. In 2012, it was Apple and Samsung building the platforms that connected people to the mobile internet. And in the current AI revolution, this would be companies like Microsoft and Google who are inventing the new AI models that are powering the next generation of apps. But even though it takes longer to see the final stocks rise, the biggest winners in a technology revolution are the software and service companies that build on top of the semiconductors and infrastructure that came before. Back in 2013, stocks like Google and Amazon saw their values start to rise as the mobile platforms that supported them became more mature. But the real rise happened over 2 years later when the value they delivered to customers far outstripped the price increases of the semiconductors and infrastructure stocks that came before. So today, in the current AI cycle, these software companies would be the likes of Palantir and Crowdstrike. And considering we've seen the first wave of AI stocks like Nvidia creating millionaires overnight, and even the second wave of AI model makers like Microsoft and Google rising, the AI software revolution is next on the list. But is CrowdStrike going to continue dropping like they have been recently, or will they be able to rise this wave to a 3 to 5x increase in price from here? So I had 3 goals looking at this stock. First, to understand CrowdStrike as a business to tell us which of these paths they're on, especially given their recent missteps. Second, to figure out what's special about CrowdStrike's products that caused them to double in price in the first place. And 3, determine is there something that will cause the next 75% jump in the stock price before it happens. But to solve that first goal of understanding CrowdStrike's business to better predict their future, we need to start in CrowdStrike's past. CrowdStrike's founder and CEO George Kurtz has taken the brunt of the recent backlash, but he has a very interesting background to say the least. He's kind of just full of apparent contradictions. So Kurtz is a well-respected deep thinker on cybersecurity, but also an actual sports car driver. He has deep connections to the legacy cybersecurity business, but he's also trying to break the mold of what's been done before. He's both loved by some and hated by others. So I think it's important to start our investigation of CrowdStrike's business in the years before the company was founded, since that's where we see the foundation that would later dictate much of CrowdStrike's future business being built. So Kurtz graduated college as an accountant, but he always had a love for computers. He actually started automating his accounting work as an intern for PwC, and someone noticed and tapped him to join PwC's first ever security group. This was 1993. After working at Ernst & Young and PwC for years as a consultant, Kurtz decided to leave and apply his talent for security by starting his first company. Foundstone was a small startup that offered many of the same capabilities that CrowdStrike would later become known for. And maybe it was unlucky timing, but it was founded right in the middle of the dot-com bubble. But unlike many dot-com companies that were all flash and high valuations with no real products, Foundstone quickly became respected for their thought leadership and white papers, as well as their track record with responding to security incidents. So in this way, Kurtz's original company was really the prototype for CrowdStrike, and they had 2 main businesses. 1, deploying security software to sell to other businesses, and 2, providing services where they helped respond to active security incidents. And they were really good at both. So I kind of thought Kurtz was just a business guy, but it was around this time that he literally wrote the book on stopping hacking. He's the co-writer of Hacking Exposed, with 600,000 copies sold and countless spin-offs inspired. Kurtz, it turns out, is a rare combination of someone who really knows his field and has managed to build a multi-billion-dollar business. You know, he's actually competent, but that doesn't mean he doesn't make mistakes. So let's fast forward. His startup Foundstone survived the dot-com crash relatively unscathed, and it gets acquired by McAfee. Yes, that McAfee, the company that makes the world's worst antivirus. Also, side note, did you know John McAfee himself made a video about how to uninstall his own program? It's kind of insane, probably not safe to watch on a work computer. So when his company gets acquired, Kurtz goes to work for McAfee, and over the next 6 years, he works his way up to worldwide chief technology officer. But Kurtz wasn't super impressed with McAfee, and he was kind of planning on leaving, but he stuck around to help the new executive team, just in time for McAfee to accidentally cause a large IT outage in 2010. So a lot of recent news has liked to compare this outage to the latest outage caused by Crowdstrike, and they do have a lot of similarities, including the reboot loop that they caused on Windows machines worldwide. But from what I can tell from reading articles released around that time, Kurtz didn't seem to have much involvement in that outage, at least, since McAfee had several other high-profile IT issues around that same time, including from before Kurtz was CTO. But regardless, huge IT issues are a recurring theme we'll see in the cybersecurity industry as we go. So fast forward 1 year. The story goes that one day in 2011, Kurtz is flying home from some business meeting, and the passenger in the seat next to him opens his laptop. Kurt glances over and notices that McAfee antivirus pops up. Kurtz watches as this passenger struggles with the program as it bogs down his computer, and something inside of Kurtz flips. Now, Kurtz had probably already known this, but two things crystallized in that moment. One, the whole security market had major flaws, and two, there was a massive opportunity that no one was addressing, and there had to be a better way to do security. Kurtz left McAfee shortly afterward and founded Crowdstrike in 2012. So Crowdstrike, as a security company, really has two main problems that they deal with. One, how do you protect software without bogging it down like the legacy providers, basically making the cure worse than the virus? And two, how do you operate in a world where you're not just trying to make the software better, you're also actively fighting malicious code that wants to break your code? Because how Crowdstrike responded to those two problems would ultimately drive their value to the market. So it's 2012, a time when the cloud is growing at an accelerating pace and the old way of doing things can't keep up. It's hard to imagine now, but many companies refused to even use the cloud because they thought it wasn't secure. The idea of running your company's applications on someone else's computer or even storing your data in someone else's data center wasn't super popular at the time. And it was in this environment that Crowdstrike got their start, putting them in line to massive growth if they could help customers achieve the value that could be unlocked by using the cloud in a secure way. So that was the fundamental thesis of the business, but that then leads to our second question. What makes Crowdstrike's products special? Like, why is the stock price still up 75% for the past year, even after their recent drop? Well, it's the same reason why most of their customers use 4 or more of Crowdstrike's products. So this is super important to investors because with talks of Crowdstrike's customers losing confidence in the company, what's ultimately going to determine their future market value once all the smoke clears is the value that their products provide. So there are really 3 pieces of what Crowdstrike does, and their value is realized when they put all 3 of them together. 1, they're cloud native, unlike the legacy security providers. 2, they use a single lightweight agent that doesn't slow down your machine, at least normally. And 3 is their threat graph database, which actually uses some similar techniques to those we looked at in the video on Palantir. Get subscribed to know when the next video on that stock comes out, because it may feature a guest from inside Palantir itself. So for that first point on Crowdstrike's products, the cloud market has obviously advanced far beyond where it was in 2012, but it's still a rapidly growing market. Here's a chart showing the growth in the cybersecurity industry at large. It's set to double over the next 6 years. But here's the growth in the cloud cybersecurity industry. That's over 26% compounded per year. Meaning if Crowdstrike was just an average cybersecurity company, that's a 3x in 6 years by just riding the market. But IT outage aside for a moment, Crowdstrike is far from average. Here's a clip from the end of last year before Crowdstrike was really in the news that does a great job explaining what's happening in the cybersecurity industry.
The thing about cybersecurity that I think everyone needs to understand, it is the guaranteed secular bull market of the next 10 years. It's not that these companies can't have softer quarters here and there. It's that the longer-term tailwind for anything to do with cybersecurity is virtually written and enshrined into law. There are now regulatory requirements for publicly traded companies to announce material breaches within 4 days. What constitutes a material breach? Well, I'll put it to you this way. I dare you not to report it. So that's the backdrop. And if we think AI is a big deal, and we think the continued migration to the cloud is a big deal, and all of these other exciting things like virtual reality and augmented reality and machine learning and every buzzword you could think of, you can't do any of it if you can't secure data and if your employees and customers can't access a network securely. I think the TAM here, McKinsey says, could be $2 trillion in the coming years.
So the cloud security market is taking off, and CrowdStrike is one of the leading players in that market. But now we get to the second part of CrowdStrike's product that is really their secret weapon, but is also responsible for a lot of their issues right now. When George Kurtz left McAfee in 2012, he vowed to not make the same mistake of slowing down his customers' systems with bloated software. Instead, CrowdStrike would use a single lightweight agent that just sits on the machine, and all the advanced processing runs outside of it. What made this small piece of software special was that it wasn't just scanning new files for viruses. It was running at the core kernel level of the machine, looking for patterns that could be a sign of a virus or a breach that's already inside. So there's some advantages to this approach. Little to no resources needed from your computer, doesn't really impact your day-to-day, catches the bad guys better. But there are also disadvantages. You have to give the agent very sensitive access to your machine, and you can break things very easily. So here's how CrowdStrike's little agent accidentally brought down the world's computers. That is crazy. We'll get to the final goal of predicting CrowdStrike's potential to recover from here in a second, but I feel like it's important for investors to understand what CrowdStrike did wrong to cause this outage and what the effects might be. So Thursday, July 18th, close to midnight, 911 operators start noticing issues with their systems, preventing them from getting emergency services out to people in need. Some hospitals also start reporting issues around this time, where every single computer seemed to just stop working. By 1 a.m. on Friday, the US government started noticing. The US Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, grounded Delta and American Airlines planes due to an IT issue, and it soon spread. By the afternoon, airlines, trains, hospitals, corporate computers, all of them were showing the fatal blue screen of death. Here's Times Square during the middle of the outage. And that whole outage that caused billions in damages and took down Windows computers around the world was all caused by one little update to CrowdStrike's Falcon sensor program and a misstep during testing. Here's a simple breakdown of what actually happened, since a lot of the info out there is either overly sensational or really technical and hard to understand. So I'm going to steal a lot of this from Dave's Garage, who's a former Microsoft engineer who makes great YouTube videos. But basically, you can imagine a Windows computer like two rings. The kernel is like the super fortified inner ring. It's where anything that needs a lot of access, like the ability to control hardware, runs. And the second is the user ring, where any apps your mom installs from a sketchy website get run. So if there's an error in a user application, no big deal, because it can't cross this line to affect the core of the machine. So the app just crashes and restarts. But if you're a theoretical company called, I don't know, Crowdstrike, and you have a sensor program that runs at the kernel level, any uncaught error will cause the machine to immediately throw a blue screen of death. The computer does this to protect itself, because any error in the kernel ring could corrupt your data, ruin another application, or even physically damage your computer. So when CrowdStrike pushed a change to a file that didn't even run code, it was just a list of definitions that other code used, a small error in that file triggered every computer running CrowdStrike's Falcon sensor to shut down every time it ran, which happened every time the machine turned on, causing an infinite loop. So now CrowdStrike is left holding the blame for the estimated 8.5 million Windows devices that were affected. But what does this mean for CrowdStrike's future, besides teaching them not to push updates on Friday? Well, there are two main questions that I see people asking that could affect the stock price. Number one, why didn't CrowdStrike catch this error in a test environment before it was deployed to millions of machines? And two, why did other companies trust CrowdStrike enough to let them just push updates to their machines? So those questions will get answered over the coming months, but I think the second one is a bigger deal to investors, because trust is part of what CrowdStrike sells. It's really the core of their business. See, the third part of CrowdStrike's product is their threat graph database, where they track every breach and virus, as well as the context of what was happening around those breaches. This has been a massive differentiator from other security companies in the past, and it relies on the trust that built the company. In 2014, Sony Pictures was hit by a massive ransomware attack, which the FBI later pinned squarely on the North Korean government. But it was later revealed that CrowdStrike was a core part of discovering that connection, with CrowdStrike tracking the adversaries who had infiltrated Sony for years prior to the hack. CrowdStrike got a lot of praise for this, and it was their first real moment in the spotlight, but it wouldn't be the last. In 2020, hackers targeted the company's SolarWinds, using it as a jumping off point to breach bigger companies ranging from Microsoft and Intel to the US Department of Defense. This is still sometimes considered the largest security incident in history, even exposing the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency. You know, just the office in charge of protecting the federal government from hacks. This hack was so wide-ranging that it seemed like everyone was affected. But there was one group of customers that weren't impacted. CrowdStrike was able to successfully contain the attackers and prevent them from spreading throughout their customers' networks. And one of the main reasons CrowdStrike grew to be so well respected and used by millions of machines today is because they were so successful at fending off this attack. So CrowdStrike's products seem as strong as ever, but that trust is the piece they'll need to rebuild. But that leads us to our third goal. We need to understand, is there something inside CrowdStrike that will cause the next 75% jump in their stock price? So I think a lot of CrowdStrike's rise in 2024 leading up to their recent pullback was driven by the company's use of AI. But unlike a lot of so-called AI stocks that are being hyped up in the market right now, CrowdStrike is providing real value to their customers. In CrowdStrike's first 100 days as a public company, Kurtz laid out his plan for CrowdStrike's growth, a plan that is directly guiding CrowdStrike's AI today. Kurtz's main goal was to put their customers first. If the customers like your product, they'll stick around and spend more money. And so the single most important metric in CrowdStrike's business is their customer retention rate. How many customers from last year are still with you this year, and did they use your platform more than last year? This metric is extremely strong with CrowdStrike, with annual recurring revenue up 33% year over year to $3.65 billion in their most recent quarter. So when CrowdStrike says they provide AI-powered cybersecurity, they're not just marketing, they're trying to deliver value to existing customers. But what is AI cybersecurity? Well, AI, when you really break it down, is just advanced pattern matching. If you can identify patterns in viruses or breaches, you can spot an incoming attacker even if no one has seen anything exactly like it before. And that's just traditional machine learning. And now with modern generative AI, you can combine that with a graph database that tracks both the previous attacks as well as everything that was happening around the attack. It's like taking an employee, downloading the knowledge of every previous attack, and then having them answer questions about what's likely to be an attack in the future. That knowledge graph becomes like the memory center of the AI, and then the AI itself can focus on finding patterns that look similar to what it's seen before. So what then does this all tell us about CrowdStrike's future stock price? Well, based on the current feeling online, we might expect CrowdStrike's stock price to go down, something like this. Or if we were to factor in just the threat graph and their AI capabilities, I think the moat that gives them makes it unlikely they'll see a complete collapse in the stock price. But when you combine the company's stellar products with the triple secular trends of cloud security, AI, and, barring a total loss of trust from customers, big data, CrowdStrike could easily ride these waves to a 2 or 3x higher stock price than they have today. And we're still early days. If we remember that chart from earlier, CrowdStrike doesn't become the next NVIDIA. Instead, once the semiconductor market and the infrastructure from companies like Microsoft mature, it's only at that point that we see the true rise in CrowdStrike as they ride the software and services wave to become the next Google or Amazon over the next 4 or more years. Now, the biggest risk that could knock CrowdStrike off course while riding this wave of opportunity would be a major lawsuit from the IT outage. But if that happens, I'll be sure to cover it on this channel. In the meantime, I'm going to take a long-term view, and I'm investing over 100 shares in CrowdStrike today. And according to YouTube, this is the best video for you to watch next. I keep saying CloudStrike on accident. Oh, they own that website too.